closely together at the entrance. "Did you hear any unusual sound after reaching your room?" "Not at that time. I was aroused about 3 o'clock this morning by what I thought was a stealthy step in the grounds in the rear of the house, but I listened for a moment and heard nothing more." "That will do for the present, Mr. Scott. You will probably be recalled later," said the coroner, watching the secretary rather curiously. Then he added in a different tone, "The next witness is Mrs. LaGrange." There was a perceptible stir throughout the crowd as, with a movement of inimitable grace, Mrs. LaGrange stepped forward, darting a swift glance of such venomous hatred towards Scott as he again seated himself beside Miss Carleton, that the latter, with a woman's quick intuition, instantly grasped the situation and watched the proceedings with new interest and closer attention. As Mrs. LaGrange took her place and began answering the questions addressed to her, the eager listeners pressed still more closely in their efforts to catch every word, feeling instinctively that some startling developments would be forthcoming, but no one was prepared for the shock that followed when, in response to the request to state her full name, the reply came in clear tones, with unequivocal distinctness, "Eleanor Houghton Mainwaring." For an instant an almost painful silence ensued, until Dr. Westlake said, "Will you state your relation to the deceased?" "I was the lawfully wedded but unacknowledged wife of Hugh Mainwaring," was the calm reply. "Please state when and where your marriage took place," said the coroner, watching the witness narrowly. "We were married privately in London about 3 months before Mr. Mainwaring came to this country." "How long ago was that?" "A little more than 23 years." "You say that you were privately married, and that in all these years Mr. Mainwaring never acknowledged you as his wife?" "Yes. I was at that time a widow, and owing to certain unpleasant circumstances attending the last months of my former husband's life, Mr. Mainwaring insisted that our marriage be strictly private. I acceded to his wishes, and we were married as quietly as possible. At the end of 3 months he deserted me, and for 4 years I did not even know where he had gone. During that time, however, I learned that my husband, who had been fearful of soiling his proud name by having it publicly joined with mine, was, in the sight of the law, a common criminal. I finally traced him to America, and 5 years after he deserted me, I had the pleasure of confronting him with the facts which I had obtained. With passionate protestations of renewed love and fair promises of an honorable married life, he sought to purchase my silence, and fool that I was, I yielded. He claimed that he could not at once acknowledge me as his wife because he was already known as an unmarried man, but in the near future we would repeat the marriage ceremony, and I should be the honored mistress of his heart and home. I believed him and waited. Meantime, our child was born, and then a new role had to be adopted. Had he not known that he was in my power, I would then have been thrust out homeless with my babe, but he dared not do that. Instead, I was brought to Fair Oaks dressed in widow's garb, as a distant relative of his who was to be his housekeeper. So, for my son's sake, hoping he would some day receive his rights, I have lived a double life, regarded as a servant where I should have been mistress, and holding that poor position only because it was in my power to put the master of the house in a felon's cell." "Can you produce the certificate of this marriage?" inquired the coroner, regarding the witness with a searching glance as she paused in her recital. "Unfortunately," she replied, in a tone ringing with scorn and defiance, "I cannot produce our marriage certificate, as my husband kept it in his possession, and frequently threatened to destroy it. If it is in existence, it will be found in his safe, but I can produce a witness who was present at our marriage and who himself signed the certificate." "State the name of this witness." "Richard Hobson of London." "You are then acquainted with this Hobson?" the coroner inquired, at the same time making an entry in the memorandum he held. "Naturally, as he was at one time my husband's attorney." "He called at Fair Oaks yesterday, did he not?" "He did." "Do you know whether he called more than once?" "He came a second time in the evening, accompanied by his clerk." "Was his object at either time to secure an interview with Mr. Mainwaring?" "He called to see me on private business." "Had he any intention of meeting Mr. Mainwaring later?" "I know nothing regarding his intentions." "Mrs. LaGrange," said the coroner after a pause, "you were in Mr. Mainwaring's library between the hours of 11 and 12 last night, were you not?" Her face darkened with anger at his form of address. "I was in my husband's library at that hour," she replied. "How long were you there?" "I cannot state exactly," she answered indifferently. "Perhaps half an hour." "Did Mr. Scott repeat correctly your words to Mr. Mainwaring?" "I have no doubt that he did. His memory on the subject is much better than mine." What was the meaning of your threat to Mr. Mainwaring that you would make him and his friends regret the day's proceedings?" "He understood my meaning. He knew that I could set aside the will, and could ruin him by exposing his duplicity and fraud." "What reply did he make?" "He answered me, as usual, with sneers, but I saw that he felt somewhat apprehensive. I wished to give him a little time to reflect upon a proposition I had made, and I left the library, intending to return later, but," she added slowly and significantly, "I was superseded by another visitor." "Explain your meaning," said the coroner briefly. "My husband's private secretary entered the library directly after I left. Some 30 minutes later I passed down the corridor towards the library, and was startled to hear Mr. Mainwaring, in loud and excited tones, denouncing someone as a liar and an impostor. The reply was low, in a voice trembling with rage, but I caught the words, 'You are a liar and a thief. If you had your deserts, you would be in a felon's cell to-night, or transported to the wilds of Australia.' There was much more in the same tone, but so low I could not distinguish the words, and thinking Mr. Mainwaring was likely to be occupied for some time, I immediately retired to my room." "Was the voice of the second speaker familiar to you?" inquired Dr. Westlake, in the breathless silence that followed this statement. A half smile, both cunning and cruel, played around the lips of the witness as she answered, with peculiar emphasis and a ring of triumph in her tone. "The voice was somewhat disguised, but it was distinctly recognizable as that of Mr. Scott, the private secretary." To Scott himself these words came with stunning force, not so much for the accusation which they conveyed, as that her recital of those words spoken within the library seemed but the repetition of words which had rung in his brain the preceding night, as alone in his room he had, in imagination, confronted his employer with the proof of his guilt which that afternoon's search had brought to light. His fancy had vividly portrayed the scene in which he would arraign Hugh Mainwaring as a thief, and would himself in turn be denounced as an impostor, until he should have established his claims by the indubitable evidence now in his possession. Such a scene had in reality been enacted, those very words had been spoken, and for an instant it seemed to Scott as though he had been unconsciously one of the actors. The general wonder and consternation with which he was now regarded by the crowd quickly recalled him, however, to the present situation, and awakened within him a sudden, fierce resentment, though he remained outwardly calm. "At that time," continued the coroner, "were you of the opinion that it was Mr. Scott whom you heard thus addressing Mr. Mainwaring?" "Yes, I had every reason to believe it was he, and I have now additional reasons for the same belief." "Are these additional reasons founded on your own personal knowledge, or on the information of others?" "Upon information received from various members of the household." "Did you see Mr. Scott leave the library?" "I did not." "Can you state about what time you heard this conversation?" "I went immediately to my room, and there found that it only lacked 10 minutes of 1. "Did you hear any unusual sound afterwards?" "I did not. I heard no one in the halls, and Mr. Mainwaring's apartments were so remote from the general sleeping rooms that no sound from there, unless very loud, could have reached the other occupants of the house." Further questions failed to develop any evidence of importance, and the witness was temporarily dismissed. Glancing at his watch, the coroner remarked, "It is nearly time to adjourn, but if Mr. Hardy has returned, we will first hear what he has to report." As the valet again came forward, Dr. Westlake asked, "Were you able to learn anything concerning the strangers who were here yesterday?" "Not very much, sir," was the reply. "I went to the Arlington first and inquired for Mr. J. Henry Carruthers, and they told me there was no such person registered there. But they said a man answering that description, tall and wearing dark glasses, came into the hotel last evening and took dinner, and sat for an hour or so in the office, reading the evening papers. He went out some time between 7 and 8 o'clock, and they had seen nothing more of him." "Was Richard Hobson at the Arlington?" "No, sir, but I went to the Riverside and found R. Hobson registered there. They said he came in the forenoon and ordered a carriage for Fair Oaks. He came back to lunch, but kept his room all the afternoon. He had a man with him in his room most of the afternoon, but he took no meals there. After dinner Hobson went out, and nobody knew when he came back, but he was there to breakfast and took the first train to the city. I made some inquiries at the depot, and the agent said there was a tall man in a gray ulster and with dark glasses who took the 3:10 train this morning to the city, but he didn't notice him particularly. That was all I could learn." As the hour was late, the inquest was then adjourned until 10 o'clock the next morning, Every one connected with the household at Fair Oaks was expected to remain on the premises that night, and dinner